You weren't born a strategic, independent man. You were forged. Something happened in childhood that fundamentally rewired your operating system, broke the normal social programming, turned you into the observer instead of the participant. Most men at 40 plus carry childhood wounds, but men like you carry specific traumas that created specific psychology. This is the origin story you've never fully understood, the childhood experiences that built the man you are. The forgotten shift. By your 40s, you've lived with this personality for decades, the independence, the distance, the observation, the strategic thinking. It's so ingrained you forgot it wasn't always there, forgot there was a before, a time when you were different. But there was a before. Look back far enough and there's a shift point, a period in childhood when something changed, when normal social development got interrupted, when the path diverged from what it should have been, when the psychology you carry now emerged from trauma. Uncomfortable territory. This isn't comfortable territory. Men in their 40s don't like examining childhood wounds. We're supposed to be past that, supposed to have processed it, moved on, built successful lives despite difficult beginnings. And we have. But understanding origin doesn't diminish what we've built. It explains how we built it. The traumas that create men like you aren't random. There are specific patterns, particular childhood experiences that consistently produce this psychology. Not every difficult childhood creates this personality, but every man with this personality has a specific type of difficult childhood. The pattern is consistent. What we're examining today we're examining the childhood origin of strategic independent psychology, the specific traumas and why they created this particular wiring, how the wounded child became the strategic adult, and why understanding origin matters. Even 40 years later, let's begin. Trauma. 1. Early betrayal by trusted authority. The foundational trauma is early betrayal by someone who should have been trustworthy. Parent, teacher, coach, religious leader. Someone in an authority position who violated trust during formative years when you were still learning who to trust. This wasn't minor disappointment. This was a fundamental breach. The person who should have protected you hurt you, or the person who should have believed you dismissed you, or the person who should have been stable was chaotic. The lesson learned, the betrayal taught you that authority figures are untrustworthy. For many men in their 40s, this was a parent, often the father. The man who should have been a role model was absent, abusive, weak present, but emotionally unavailable, unstable, and unpredictable. The male authority figure failed at the foundational level. What this created? Early independence by necessity. Can't depend on a father who isn't dependable. Can't trust authority that betrayed trust. The child learns young that adults are unreliable, that you're on your own, that trust is dangerous. This early lesson becomes a permanent operating system. By your 40s, you've internalized it completely. Authority means nothing to you. Titles don't impress. Positions don't command automatic respect. You evaluate everyone directly, regardless of their role. The early betrayal destroyed your capacity for automatic deference. The observer position. The betrayal also created the observer position. When you can't trust, you watch, you analyze, you gather evidence. The traumatized child becomes a vigilant observer because observation is protection. Can't be betrayed if you see it coming. The hypervigilance that seems like a personality trait is actually a trauma response that became permanent. The moment many men at 40 plus remember the exact moment, the specific incident when they realized the adult couldn't be trusted. The memory is vivid decades later because it was transformative. That moment split life into before and after. Before, trust. After, vigilance. The betrayal didn't just create distrust of that specific person. It generalized. All authority became suspect. All trust became conditional. All relationships became evaluated. The single betrayal created permanent skepticism. By your 40s, this seems like wisdom. It started as a wound. Trauma 2. Peer rejection during critical period. The second common trauma is severe peer rejection during the critical socialization period, ages 7 to 12, when most boys are learning to be part of groups. You were learning you don't fit in groups. This wasn't normal childhood teasing. This was systematic exclusion, being the kid nobody picked for teams, the one who ate lunch alone, the one who wasn't invited. The constant message, you don't belong, you're different, the group doesn't want you. Bullying or invisibility. For some, this was bullying, physical or psychological. Being targeted, being vulnerable, learning that groups are dangerous, that visibility attracts predators, that safety requires invisibility. The bullying taught withdrawal as a survival strategy. For others, it was subtler, not active rejection, just not being included, being overlooked, forgotten. The invisible child who teachers barely noticed and peers never considered. The loneliness of being physically present but socially absent. What this created, adaptation to solitude. When you're excluded from groups, you either break trying to get in or you adapt to being outside. You adapted, learned to be comfortable alone, found interest that didn't require others, built identity independent of peer acceptance. By your 40s, you've been alone so long, it feels natural. Prefer it even. The solitude that was forced in childhood became chosen in adulthood. What started as exclusion became preference. The adaptation is so complete, you forgot it was an adaptation. Internal validation system. The isolation also created the internal validation system. When external validation isn't available, you either collapse or build internal validation. You built internal. Learn to value yourself without peer approval. Develop standards independent of group opinion. Many men at 40 plus look back at childhood isolation with gratitude now. It made me strong. I learned independence early. True, but acknowledge the cost. The isolation that built strength also built walls. The independence that became an advantage started as a defensive adaptation to rejection. Adult social pattern. The peer rejection also explains the adult social pattern. You're not antisocial. You're socially self-sufficient. The difference matters. You can socialize when necessary. You just don't need to. The childhood that taught you to function without peers created an adult who still doesn't need them. Trauma. 3. Unpredictable, chaotic household. The third common trauma is growing up in an unpredictable, chaotic household, where you never knew what to expect, where moods shifted randomly, where rules changed arbitrarily, where stability was absent and chaos was constant. Addiction, mental illness, or instability. This often involved addiction, alcoholic parent, drug-addicted parent, the household that was calm one day and explosive the next, where you learned to read subtle cues to predict adult moods, to become hypervigilant about environmental indicators. Or it was mental illness, depressed parent who couldn't function, anxious parent who transmitted anxiety, personality disordered parent who created drama, the household where you became the stable one, the child parenting the parent, or it was simply instability, frequent moves, financial chaos, relationship turbulence. The environment where nothing was reliable, where you couldn't count on anything remaining the same, where change was the only constant. What this created, self-reliance by necessity, can't depend on an unstable environment, can't rely on unreliable people. The child learns to depend on himself because nothing else is dependable. The self-sufficiency that seems like strength is a survival adaptation. By your 40s, you've been self-reliant so long, it's identity. I handle everything myself. I don't need help. True, because you learned young that help isn't coming. The self-sufficiency that looks like confidence is a continuation of childhood adaptation. The planning obsession. The chaos also created the planning obsession. In an unpredictable environment, planning is a control attempt. Can't control the environment, but can plan for multiple scenarios. The strategic thinking that seems like a personality trait is actually a trauma response. The child trying to predict an unpredictable environment became an adult who plans obsessively. Many men at 40 plus remain hypervigilant about stability, hate surprises, need control, require predictability in what they can control, because childhood had none. The adult obsession with order is a response to childhood chaos. The control need is old wounds still directing behavior. Emotional control. The chaos also explains the emotional control. In a chaotic environment, showing emotion is dangerous. Emotion attracts attention. Attention from unstable people is risky. The child learns emotional suppression as protection. The adult who doesn't show emotion is still protecting that child. Trauma 4. Conditional love. The fourth trauma is conditional love, where acceptance depended on performance, where love required achievement, where you were valued for what you did, not who you were. The message: you're not enough unless you're accomplishing. High-achieving parents or vicarious living. This often came from high-achieving parents, parents who demanded excellence, whose approval required constant achievement, where an A- was failure, where good wasn't good enough, where love felt conditional on success, or it came from parents living through the child, whose self-worth depended on the child's success, who pushed because they needed the achievement, where the child became a vehicle for the parents' unfulfilled ambitions, where the child's wants didn't matter, only results mattered. What this created: achievement drive detached from external validation. You learned to achieve, but you also learned achievement doesn't bring the love you needed, so achievement became self-directed. Proving to yourself, not to others, because proving to others never worked. By your 40s, you've achieved significantly, built a career, created success. But the achievement feels empty because you're still chasing the approval that was never really available. The adult success is the child still trying to earn unconditional love through conditional achievements. Perfectionism. The performance pressure also created the perfectionism. If love requires perfect performance, performance must be perfect. The child internalizes impossible standards. The adult maintains those standards long after the parent is gone. The perfectionism that drives success also creates suffering. Many men at 40 plus are still performing, still achieving, still trying to be enough. The success is real, the accomplishment is genuine. But the drive underneath is an old wound. The child who needed to perform to be loved became an adult who can't stop performing. Relationship difficulties. The conditional love also explains the relationship difficulties. If love was always conditional, you don't believe in unconditional love. You don't trust it when offered. You test it, push it, try to find the conditions. The adult relationships suffer from childhood learning that love always has a price. Trauma. 5. Fundamental misunderstanding. The fifth trauma is being fundamentally misunderstood or misidentified throughout childhood, where everyone had the wrong idea of who you were, where you were labeled incorrectly, where the real you was invisible, and the false version was what people responded to. Mismatch with environment. This happened when you were intelligent child in an environment that didn't value intelligence, sensitive child in an environment demanding toughness, creative child in a conventional environment, introverted child in an extroverted family. The core: you didn't match the environment's expectations. The response: hiding or being mislabeled. The response was often to hide the real self, show them what they want to see, perform the version they accept. The authentic self goes underground. The performed self handles the external world. The split between real and performed becomes permanent. Or the response was to be labeled wrongly. He's shy. No, observant. He's cold. No, careful. He's arrogant. No, competent. The labels never matched internal experience, but arguing was pointless, so you lived with being misunderstood. What this created: comfort with being unknown. If you're misunderstood anyway, why try to be understood? The adult who's fine being mysterious is the child who learned that being known doesn't happen. The privacy preference is an adaptation to permanent misunderstanding. By your 40s, you've accepted that most people won't understand you. You're fine with it. Maybe prefer it. The comfort with being misunderstood is so complete, you forgot it started as a wound. The child who wasn't seen became an adult who doesn't need to be seen. The authenticity obsession. The misidentification also created the authenticity obsession. If you spent childhood being a false version, adulthood is recovering the authentic version. The insistence on authenticity is a reaction to childhood of performance. The adult refusing to perform is the child reclaiming the real self. Many men at 40 plus are still discovering who they actually are. Decades of performing leave the authentic self buried. The midlife crisis many experience is actually the first time examining who they are versus who they've been performing. The crisis is the wound finally being addressed. The compound trauma. None of these traumas alone create this psychology. The combination creates it. Authority betrayal, plus peer rejection, plus just household chaos, plus conditional love, plus misidentification. The compound trauma creates the compound adaptation. Each trauma created a specific defense: authority betrayal, distrust and independence, peer rejection, observer position and self-sufficiency, chaos, hypervigilance and control, need conditional love, achievement, drive and perfectionism, misidentification, authenticity, berets, drive and privacy preference. The defenses worked. They protected the child, enabled survival, created functioning despite damage. The adaptations that started as wounds became strengths. The traumatized child became a capable adult. The defenses that were survival mechanisms became personality traits. By your 40s, the defenses are so integrated, their identity. You don't think, I'm using a defense mechanism. You think, this is who I am. True, but understanding origin reveals the defense underneath the identity. That strength was built on a wound doesn't diminish the strength. It explains its foundation. Why the psychology is rigid. The combined traumas also explain why this psychology is so rigid. These aren't preferences. They're survival adaptations that became hardwired. You can't just be more social, or trust more, or relax control. These defenses kept you alive. The brain won't abandon them easily. Understanding this matters at 40 plus because you might be wondering why you can't change traits you don't like. Can't be more trusting, can't need people less, can't relax vigilance. It's not lack of effort, it's that these traits are trauma responses. They're not going anywhere without addressing the underlying wounds. Why understanding origin matters now. You're 40 plus. You've been living with this psychology for decades. Why does understanding childhood origin matter now? Reason 1, it reframes the narrative. You're not defective, you're adapted. The traits that feel like problems are solutions to childhood problems. The personality that seems difficult is a survival response that worked. Understanding origin creates compassion for yourself. Reason 2, it explains relationship patterns. Why you keep people at distance, why trust is difficult, why you leave when things get close. These aren't character flaws. They're old defenses still operating. Understanding lets you choose whether to maintain defenses or risk lowering them. Reason 3, it reveals what you're still protecting. The 40-year-old man is still protecting the wounded child, still vigilant against betrayal, still defending against rejection, still controlling against chaos, still performing for conditional love, still hiding the authentic self. The child's needs are still directing adult behavior. Reason 4, it explains the midlife examination. Many men like you in their 40s start questioning everything: the career, the relationships, the life structure. This isn't a crisis. This is the wounded child finally getting heard. The adaptations that worked are being examined. Do they still serve? Or do they limit? Reason 5, it provides a framework for healing. Can't heal what you don't understand. Understanding that these traits are trauma responses opens the possibility of addressing the trauma, not to eliminate traits, to choose them consciously, rather than be driven by unconscious wounds. The origin story. So that's the origin story. Authority betrayal, peer rejection, household chaos, conditional love, fundamental misunderstanding. The specific childhood traumas that created this psychology. The wounds that became strengths. The adaptations that became identity. You weren't born this way. You were made this way. The experiences shaped you. The traumas created defenses. The defenses became personality. By your 40s, it's so integrated you forgot the origin. But the origin is still there, still operating, still protecting the child who needed protection decades ago. Understanding doesn't change you. It adds dimension. Understanding. This doesn't change who you are. You're still the same man, still have all the traits, still operate the same way, but understanding adds dimension. The strength has a story, the independence has an origin, the observer position has a reason. You're not defective, you're adapted. The knowledge is power at 40 plus. This knowledge is power, power to choose. The child needed these defenses. Does the adult still need them all? Some, yes. Some, maybe not. Understanding origin creates the option to examine each defense, keep what serves, consider modifying what limits, not to become a different person, to become a more intentional version of the same person. The wounded child, the strong adult. The wounded child became a strong adult. That's an achievement worth acknowledging. But the child is still there. Still wounded, still directing from underneath. Addressing the child doesn't diminish the adult. It completes him. Final thought. If you're a 40-plus man who recognized your origin story in these traumas, drop origin acknowledged in the comments. And tell me which trauma hit hardest. If this opened an understanding of yourself you didn't have before, sit with it. The recognition is the beginning. The healing, if desired, comes from understanding first. And if you're wondering whether to address these old wounds at your age, consider this. You've lived 40-plus years with defenses built from trauma. Maybe it's time to examine whether all the defenses are still necessary. Not to become vulnerable, to become free. Until next time, understand your origin,